Hello, I'm Dr. John Pelletieri, President and co-founder of the International Society for Emotional Intelligence. And we're pleased to present the 5th episode of Conversations in Emotional Intelligence, using EI to cope with the COVID-19 crisis. And my co-host, Paul Edwards, founder and co-director for the Emotional Intelligence Urban Initiative, and Dr. Fritz Gillette, a clinical psychologist in practice in New York City. So we're pleased to be together again. And we're also very pleased to have another guest, Wendy Freeburn, who is an emergency nurse, has 22 years of experience in ER, and has worked with patients with trauma. And we're very pleased and happy that she can come here today and be with us. I know the last few months were a very difficult period, so we were not able to get any ER people to join us, but we're very happy here that Wendy could be with us today. So Wendy Freeburn, welcome and thank you.
Thank you.
And we want to talk about
have healthcare professionals in the room. So let's talk about EI happening in the real world. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you.
Welcome, Wendy.
I'm much glad to be here.
So one of the big questions we have is, how do the healthcare workers cope? How do they manage this incredible crisis that we've all been going through?
So, well, for the first few weeks, I would say they were not coping very well. It was really, really difficult. Nurses had the mindset to just get in there and do what they had to do, and then deal with their trauma later. We were trying to hold each other up, a lot of encouraging words. We had some pastors that were coming through the emergency room to kind of help people who were not coping well. But it was really tough there for a few weeks.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was.
I could tell you just some of the things that I did myself just to kind of boost myself. I would listen to certain music in the morning on my way to work. I like Jason Mraz. He happens to be very happy and uplifting for me. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, when I was totally exhausted, I listened to either Tupac or AC/DC because that's the kind of mood I was in when I left. But little things like that.
Well, you know, I like Tupac too, Wendy. But I have a question for you though. Mm-hmm. You spent over 20 years working in emergency rooms, correct?
Yes.
Do you think that has made you more? Do you think that you came into this COVID situation with a certain resilience because you've been working 20 years in emergency? And was it easier for you to help your coworkers because you worked in emergency rooms for over 20 years?
Yes, definitely. The emergency room nurses really were at an advantage when it came to this crisis, because it actually ended up affecting the entire hospital, which is not normal in these kind of situations. Like, we always had bad days where you had, a lot of more patients that you felt like you can handle, and you learn how to get through that. So that definitely helped a lot. We also, me having a lot of experience there, helped in that people could come to me and ask my advice. So I think that gives you a certain level of support as well.
Did you generally see that the individuals who worked in emergency prior to COVID their attitudes were different as a group compared to those who haven't worked in emergency?
Ask that question again.
So do you find that people who worked in the emergency room for years, if they had a different mindset than those who did not?
Yeah, I would say that is definitely true. Just a higher level of comfort. We've actually been training for a situation like this for a long time. We've known, the healthcare community has known that this was going to happen. We've trained for this, for biological warfare, for weapons of mass destruction. We've been training for this. However, when it actually happened, I don't think it caught us all back on our heels, even though we felt like we were prepared at the time. The level of it was something that none of us had expected.
Do you think that maybe in the future civilians should be also trained in? I mean, you guys have been trained for this. You know it was coming. I'm thinking now, considering how this has affected so many of us globally, I'm wondering if we could train civilians, civilians meaning non-medical, into,
Mhm.
down the line in the same way you guys have been trained, for something like this. What do you think?
I think that the more information that you can give to people, the better. I don't know how you would train people. I don't know if you mean to like take care of each other. I don't know how that would work out, but I definitely think that people need to be more aware of just the disease in general and how to minimize the, like spreading it from person to person, that kind of thing. I think that I've been thinking this for years, and I'm sure any emergency room nurse that you spoke to would feel the same way, but just to teach people what is an emergency, what is appropriate to go to the emergency room, so that I think that's one of the things that's helped with this situation overall, is focusing on the positives. And I think one of the positives is that it's really forced people to have a different mindset about healthcare and emergency medicine, and keeps people from going to the emergency room when really they should be going to their family doctor, that kind of thing. I think that kind of information is really important for the general public.
And we know that EI builds resilience. So I guess the higher level your EI, no matter what you have to face, whether it's home or, more COVID,
Right.
your resilience is, right?
Yeah. And that is one of the things that we use to boost each other. Like you're going through this day and it was really like living in hell. It was like a war zone for a while. But we would tell each other, we're going to be rock stars after this. Like, we're doing it. Like, this is happening and we're doing it. That kind of attitude really helped.
So that positive attitude was encouraging for them.
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Positive outlook and the opportunity to turn the experience into something that you were learning from. You'd mentioned earlier that the profession was training for this. What sort of psychological training was offered in order to prepare for this? Or was there any?
There was none.
There was none.
None at all. They did talk about when it happens that there would be debriefings, but that, like we will help you after it's over, but there was really nothing to help you prepare mentally for it while it was happening.
Well, I think your 22 years of experience, you've seen a lot and you've had to deal with a lot of emotions through the course of that. So it's like emotional learning has occurred. You developed a resiliency,
right?
Sort of your own internal capacity to manage tremendous, intense, and negative emotions over the years.
And the nurses that have been there, you were asking about the nurses that have been there for a long time compared to the newer nurses, have had the benefit of that. And people who can't deal with that aspect of it tend to move on to something else. So the nurses who've been there for a while are there because they love it, and they've learned how to deal with those certain emotions.
It's like an inoculation effect.
Yeah.
Like we're hoping COVID would be if you've had it, but we're not even sure if that's going to occur.
Yeah, we're hoping.
What do you think of, and what do you think will be going forward, the training? Do you think they will include psychological training? Do you think that they will call people like us to come in and do some EI training, Maybe a future plug here.
I certainly hope so. I haven't heard any talk of that. We're still kind of in the middle of it, so that whole debriefing piece hasn't happened. But the hospital itself has made available psychologists, and we can actually have therapy sessions online. So I do see that happening now. But yeah, I think that would be very helpful. I think it would be helpful to have a psychologist, somebody in there during the, you don't want to expose people, but even to have somebody in the waiting room when you're telling family members you can't come in with your family who's gasping for breath, to help them deal with that. Those are all things that I think going forward, as we look back on it, should happen the next time.
One of the main reasons we're doing this series is we're trying, as a public service, we're trying to talk about and bring the topic of EI into the public sphere. So I'd be happy to share this with other healthcare providers, because I think going forward, you're going to see a lot of PTSD and long-term effects of trauma I've been exposed to.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
And another question I have, Wendy, is how did you manage personally, knowing that every day you go to work is a potential risk? I mean, that's a stress on any of the healthcare workers and certainly their family members.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think people manage that kind of stress?
Yeah. Well, it's a risk, that we take every day anyway. I've had patients on isolation. I've had patients with bugs, that you don't want to take home. I've gone home and undressed in my garage and changed my clothes so I don't bring something inside. Never to this level where I'm spending, my entire shift with people that could pass something that was obviously very potentially deadly. We've just figured it out. We were lucky enough that we're in a place that we did not have a shortage. They were rationing our PPE. That's the gowns and gloves and everything. But I was never put in a position where I had to go into a room not feeling like I was protected. So that really helped a lot. And I think it protected me knowing that I had family at home, because I was that much more cautious, not wanting to bring things home.
We talk about empathy and emotional intelligence. We talk about self-awareness. Do you feel a level of empathy or high levels of empathy with the people that you're working with? And do you feel the empathy from the patients also? Do you think that they understand that your job is difficult? Of course, you for years have understood when a patient is going through something, you're empathetic to that. But
Yeah.
did you see the empathy in the patient towards
Yes.
those who are?
This particular situation, I felt that more than I ever have before. Patients were coming in and thanking you, and like why it was watching us run back and trying to take care of more than we could handle, and we're actually expressing that they noticed that and thank you for doing it. So yeah, and empathy for each other, definitely. I think it's brought us together. I've never been prouder to be a nurse, but it's brought us together in a way that I've never experienced before, in nursing also, and in healthcare in general. The doctors, making sure that you're okay emotionally, not just that you have what you need physically, but that emotionally you're right. We had one situation with a nurse who, she was a traveler. She came in to help us because of the COVID outbreak. And all of us had a lot more patients than you could deal with. And she was working in an area that was not physically built for having a critical patient, and all of her patients were critical and on ventilators. And while she was caring for one very sick patient, the other one had become disconnected from his ventilator. And she went into the room and saw he was disconnected, started to connect him again, and he went into cardiac arrest because he wasn't ventilated for a while. And she was screaming, and we all came and we did CPR and got him, and she was hysterical, understandably hysterical. We got the guy back. He was a young man too, which made it even more terrible. And he was actually moving a little while later. So we actually were able to save him. But the nurses and the doctors took her aside. We took her away from the whole area, gave her patients to somebody else, but really spent a lot of time talking to her, telling her, of course, it's not your fault, and talking her through those feelings, because she was feeling like it was all her fault. The next day she came back and she actually worked with the same patient again and was doing great.
Right.
So, I've been seeing a lot of that go on. It's really heartwarming.
We teach, we train, we certify in emotional intelligence. And so, you could do a course, right? And then you leave the course or whatever, and then you go about your everyday, to incorporate it in your everyday life becomes difficult. But I could imagine that you guys have to regulate your emotions constantly. You're constantly training in EI because you're dealing with it in your face every day. I mean, there's no better training than hands-on, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just saying there's a difference. It's different when you have to regulate every day and monitor yourself every day.
That was a powerful story, Wendy. And I think what it highlights also is the idea of the group practicing emotional intelligence, the group of workers helping to regulate this other woman's intense reaction. So I think it's interesting to think about not emotional intelligence, not only as a set of abilities for one individual, but how can the group together help each other to recognize emotions, to manage emotions, to process experiences emotionally.
And I think it's important to allow yourself to feel those things. You know, you can't fall apart, of course, when you're working, but you really do need to take a moment to allow yourself. Like, I go home and cry every day. Like, you need to do it, and so that I can reset and, you know, go on to the next thing I have to do.
It's often been said that this is a time where it's okay to not be okay, to
Right.
feel
Right.
what you feel.
Yeah.
And I can imagine, you know, one of the things we say when we're training psychotherapists is that often great psychotherapists are born, they're not necessarily trained to be that way, but the training helps people to identify the skills, the techniques, the abilities that need to be there. I can see that with all of your experience, you've actually become quite emotionally intelligent. And so it's great to talk to somebody who's the embodiment of that. You may not necessarily feel like that, but every day people are clapping and cheering healthcare providers.
Yeah.
And probably we should also an extra round of applause to people like yourself that are experienced, that can be there to help the helpers when they're falling apart.
I think we're just going to certify you today in emotional intelligence. We're going to give you a level 3 certification today. Okay.
I appreciate it.
No, it is heroic, and rightfully so. What everyone has been, you know, the healthcare workers themselves, putting themselves in that danger. It's an uncommon valor, a certain kind of courage that is coming from regular people, becoming really extraordinary.
So, wow. So it's great to have you here, Wendy, to talk about it, because, you know, for the first few episodes, it was myself, Paul, and John, and, you know, we wanted to speak to somebody that was on the front lines, but at the time we started, the front lines were so tumultuous.
Yeah.
Even if you had a moment to step away, you probably wouldn't have had any psychological energy to speak.
Right. I couldn't really talk about it it's still hard to talk about.
Yeah. And so how are things now?
Things like in the hospital?
Yeah. And all around, how are they for you?
Yeah. It's much better. It's almost, and it's funny because I was just talking about this with another nurse the other day. Like, we still have all this adrenaline. It's almost anticlimactic that it seems like it's ending. Like, we're all still geared to go, and it's scaled back so much, and really very sharply and drastically in a short amount of time, that I don't think our emotions have caught up to that yet. You know, like, we need some time, I guess, to process. But we're still feeling, you know, like we want to jump in there and help out, and there's not that much to do right now.
Well, you're like frontline troops that have seen a lot of combat, and now we're on the other side of that, and I guess there's a lot of differing opinions as to what that means, because yes, there's been a sharp pullback, but it can still go back to the way it was.
Right. Yeah, and that's another part of it is we're kind of holding our breath also, because we really do expect it to get worse again. So there's that part of it. Although we do feel like we are now more prepared for it, but it's still a scary situation, because all the projections are that it's going to come back, and we're probably in for a really bad winter and that kind of thing.
So, you know, we've talked in the past about sharing EI at home, you know, putting a mood meter on the refrigerator. We should send you some mood meters you could pass out at the hospital.
Yes.
But when you go home, do you find that you are relieved to be home? Meaning that, does home bring a certain sense of comfort, or do you find that you're stressed going home because of what you came out of?
I'm definitely relieved to go home. It's difficult to put into words, but it's hard to talk about. Like, everybody wants you to, especially when it was really bad, they kind of want you to tell them what's going on and how are you doing, and it's so difficult to talk about, and it's really difficult to talk about with people who aren't experiencing it, because it's just surreal while you're going through it. And it's a lot easier actually to be at work and to talk to people that are there who are also experiencing the same thing.
Right. So family is comforting but they're not experiencing what you're experiencing. So
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
certain emotional
And
synchronicity that you have with your coworkers that brings comfort, even though
right.
you're in a situation in the midst of it. It's still
Yeah.
comforting because who else knows but the people that you work with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very
Yeah.
similar narrative to what I've heard from combat veterans or people who are in between tours of combat, where they come back and they're spending a few months in civilian life, but it's such a surreal experience that the dichotomy between the two.
Right. Yeah. It's like it's hard to relate now. Like I feel like I've changed somehow, and the rest of the world really hasn't. You know.
Yeah.
Well, going forward as a strategy, that's interesting that people may need to seek out others who have had similar experiences. It's easier to share. And someone who hasn't gone through it, like you said, just it's hard for them to relate.
And I'm lucky, unlike, you know, people in combat that leave and they're not in that situation anymore. I'm still working there. I'm still working with these people that also experienced it. And as time goes on, it does become easier and easier to talk about with other people.
I guess that's always that's like the program with anything, right? You know, Alcoholics Anonymous. You sit with people who relate. You know, so.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, no, we have a few minutes left, but in closing, Wendy, and any maybe words of wisdom or lessons that have been learned so far that you might think are useful?
I could say what's helped me a lot was really focusing on the positives. Even though it's a terrible situation, there were a lot of positives that came out with it. One of those being, like I said, the patient, I feel more appreciated by society in general and by my patients. I thought about the fact that I actually have a job, and there are people who don't have that right now, and all the worries that come with that. I'm not, you know, forced to be concerned about that. I learned a lot. The last couple of almost a year now, I was not working regularly in the emergency room. You know, was able to go back there. It's my true love, emergency medicine. So I actually got to do that, and I learned more about medicine and critical care than I ever have before in a very short period of time. So just focusing on those little positive things that happen here and there really helps you get through it also.
Okay.
I think it would be great. It would be great if we certified hundreds of nurses in EI so they could, you know, they're on the front line.
At this point, I'm sure you could.
And I also think you're in a great position to get a pay raise after all of this is over, all of you and your coworkers.
Right, we're going to put in the word.
Yes, my coworkers would agree with you.
I don't think we could thank the healthcare workers enough. And a pay raise would be certainly appropriate, but that's not even enough, given what everyone's put themselves through. Yeah, so thank you, everyone. Wendy, I really appreciate. Congratulations.
Thank you, Wendy.
And, you know,
Thank you.
we really appreciate what you've done for society, for the community, and have contributed a tremendous amount to our conversations here.
Thank you.
And we wish you the best going forward.
Thanks.
I'm gonna listen to some Tupac today, Wendy, because you've inspired me.
Okay. He helps me keep me going.
Wow, but it's great. It's been great.
Okay, and thank you. And we look forward to episode 6 in about a week or so.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
And where do we go for past episodes, John? You have the website memorized.
The International Society for Emotional Intelligence website. It's www.emotionalintelligencesociety.org. It's one word, emotionalintelligencesociety.org. We have all our episodes listed there. And feel free to share with anyone who may benefit from that.
And we're going to be on iHeartRadio, so we'll share that information next time, the next podcast.
Cool.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you and take care.
Thank you.
Take care.